Cool. Well, hello again, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Outward Bound Campfire Chats. My name is Paul Marshalsea, and I am the Head of Early Careers for the Outward Bound Trust. Today, I've got the great pleasure of being joined by Aimee Harman of GK Apprenticeships, and Aimee's role at GK is Culture and Equity Lead. So welcome, Aimee. Great to have you with us.
Much. Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
A little bit different to the shores of Estelle, but
marginally.
Absolutely. Anyway, Aimee, it'd be great to hear a little bit about GK Apprenticeships and your role. If you could kind of give us some insight, please.
Yeah, of course. So we are a apprenticeship training provider, essentially specialising in a huge, wide range of IT programs. So to name a few, we've got software tester, software developer, network engineer, cybersecurity. The list kind of goes on and on and on. So that's our bread and butter, really. And we've been doing that for, I think about 16, 17 years. So definitely a long old while. My new role, so great timing on the timing of this podcast recording. I've just moved into my new role, but I am essentially responsible to lead the business in DEI and their learning needs strategy, essentially to provide what you'd class as the best learner experience possible, which is the cornerstone for us as an organisation. So, yeah, I think without going into every detail, that's quite a lot.
I was going to say, I mean, those diversity, equity, inclusion, culture, I mean, they're huge topics as standalone. So, yeah, there's going to be some great opportunity for you to really get your teeth into some stuff as the time goes on and you get your feet under the desk, which sounds really exciting. And I love the focus that you guys share there about that learner experience. I think putting the young people, the learners, right at the heart of it is absolutely essential. So that's great to hear. So I guess what I'd be interested in then is kind of what is it that you guys are meaning when you think about diversity, equity, inclusion with GKA and yourself?
It's a huge topic, as you've said, and it's ever evolving in regards to a business's kind of position on it. Essentially, the core understanding for me is what you'd call a working environment dedicated to putting people first and essentially allowing them to achieve with all the support they need, which is where the equity piece comes in. So clearly diversity, a workplace that reflects everybody, especially in relation to those protected characteristics, which is something that we in the UK very much look at with all the acts we look at. Equity. So every individual is given the support and accessibility requirements they need in order to not only do their role, but ultimately succeed and grow. So it's an evolution from everyone having the same provision, which was the equality, but actually having that tailored need, which flows not only from our staff, but also to our learners, because for us, it's a two-part. It's not only what we need to do as an organisation for our staff, but also to then fully support our learners, because clearly every person has individual needs. And then inclusion, fundamentally every person, irrelevant of their role, level within an organization, has the, I guess you'd call it empowerment to speak and contribute, but more importantly, have their voices heard. We usually in the working world hear you've got a seat at the table, and it's like, most people have to fight for one seat if you're from an underrepresented or marginalized group, but actually if you throw the table out, you've all got a seat. So it's about kind of going, you know what, I'm just going to listen. I'm going to hear what people are saying. So that's my take on it, really.
No, I mean, that's great. I mean, again, wherever it's people first and allowing that kind of opportunity to achieve, I think that strikes a huge chord with us at Outward Bound and really relates to kind of some of our just kind of underlying beliefs around people's potential. So that really resonates. I guess being that we are Outward Bound, we are on our own journey with that. And, as you can imagine, kind of working in the outdoors has not necessarily had the highest number of different genders or people from BAME backgrounds. But the young people who come to us are very much of very diverse, kind of group of people. So it's an area that we're working on quite heavily, and have 2 projects going on. One that does encourage women into the outdoors, and also one that's trying to encourage people from BAME backgrounds into the outdoors. I guess, what examples of forward thinking are you seeing in terms of things that kind of the IT comms industry that you're working in are doing or trialing? Maybe we could learn on. Yeah, sorry.
Well, it's very topical, because I'd say there are a lot of parallels between the outdoor world and the tech and computing world, because they are not renowned for being the most diverse. Fundamentally, as you said, everyone should have the option to go into our respective fields, be it tech or the IT industry, or an IT role within any business, because they've all got them. Every business is an IT business now. That's a very famous quote. So it's true. From our perspective, with all systemic based challenges, we have to start with the root issue. And there are specific groups of people who are not empowered to work in certain industries, and that could be due to preconceived systemic bias. In my opinion, the only way we move forward is to challenge these bias characteristics. For example, 2 of the most common are prove it again bias, where one group doesn't have to keep proving themselves over and over again, whereas I spend my life always justifying my role in the tech world, even though I've been in it for 8 years. And then you've got the maternal wall bias, which is huge at the moment since COVID. So those are 2 kind of base ones that I would say are some of the most prevalent ones. Without this conversation being had at all levels of the organization, by all people, it will remain the responsibility of the few. Every organization has that one DEI person just stood there flying a flag, trying to move it forward, when in fact, a great way for any organization, I would encourage every organization to do this, is to have employee advisory groups. Now, I myself am a co-chair of one of our organizational groups. It's a group of people that sit within a specific area dedicated to providing the business with on the ground, real lived experience, and essentially strategies to overcome the hurdles that we face. My EAG is called We Are Able, and that's dedicated to people with disabilities and neurodiversities. I myself have autism and ADHD, amongst a few other things. So we essentially aim to destigmatize the stigma that is around our group, and actually by educating others through education programs, as well as promoting accessibility needs are not something to be ashamed of, or indeed to ask for. It's not gone are the days when occupational health is a bad thing. Actually, understanding your needs as an individual can only help yourself and, by extension, your business.
Yeah,
So,
most definitely.
So I mean, that's key. We are exceptionally fortunate within Skillsoft, who own Global Knowledge, who own GK Apprenticeships, to have what's called C-suite investment. So within each of our employee advisory groups, we actually have a specific member of the leadership team that's basically responsible for supporting us and guiding us and championing the work we do. Because if you don't have the buy-in from the top, from the C-suite, it's nigh on impossible to achieve any of this, I'd say.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely and utterly agree. And having worked for Outward Bound for a long time, I mean, it was absolutely brilliant to see in our recent strategy document that we directly referenced the need to modernize our organization and very much focus on diversity, equality, equity, and inclusion within that. So that's now a core value for us. And in a similar vein, I love the piece you talked about that employee advisory group. I think that's something we'll probably doctor and look to do very soon. So that'd be great.
Yeah, it's great because it facilitates those people that typically don't have voices to have that voice, to actually kind of go, you know what, you know more about this than I do.
Yeah.
Let's educate, let's talk, which is fantastic.
Yeah. And I think it's the bit that you highlighted there was that kind of challenging that systemic bias.
Yeah.
So actually questioning that, and I think that's something that we're all having to do in the organisation, and I think the more we can start kind of putting that question in every day, just to identify for ourselves. I mean, it's not that people are doing anything wrong. It's that people need to understand what they're doing and then be able to make more conscious decisions of how they might do it better, I guess, and how we might create a more inclusive culture, which is fab.
Agreed.
I guess just thinking then, I mean, we're both in that field of looking at diversity, equity, inclusion from kind of early careers. I guess I'm just wondering what support from education do you think there could be across to that employment piece? So just thinking that link between schools and then apprenticeships and programs like yours.
Yeah, education is key to DEI within employment. Without learners, school learners, any type of learner, whether they come from FE or HE or self-learning, without the knowledge and real-time application of learning within DEI, within the workforce, essentially they'll be less inclusive, they'll be less diverse and less equitable. So for me, it's about schools starting this conversation early. It's giving learners that support. For example, if a group of learners are told they can't work in a particular area, or indeed aren't clever enough to achieve what they want to, that starts channeling people away from typically challenging industries to break into when they're 12, 13, 14. Those are the times when those judgments are made. I mean, tech and engineering are renowned to get beyond a certain point, but also any accommodations and accessibility needs a learner has had in school should be cascaded through into the workplace. It's not because you're not in learning, therefore you're not dyslexic. I'm dyslexic. I have more in place for me now than I did when I was in education, because it still has that application. It is who we are, essentially, and work and education has a duty to actually if it's been identified, either support or help support with identification as well.
So what? Absolutely, I'm agreeing on that. So it's kind of about making sure we're all on that same conversation piece and encouraging diversity into roles that perhaps you haven't perceived viable in the future because of maybe kind of judgments stopping people believe they could. So
exactly. Just because I'm dyslexic, like I say just because I've been taught that actually being dyslexic means I can't do things. Whereas I know the support I need, I have the requirements I need, I have flexi working and I work the hours, I have a specific set of working hours. That enables me to be extra effective in my job role, but also I knew that from school because I was diagnosed in my early secondary school years. So it's destigmatizing again. It's okay, but also the inverse. Just because you're not dyslexic or have a learning need doesn't mean you're exempt from support. So if you're identifying you have a challenge and you have a need, that will then foster a DEI environment within the workplace.
Absolutely. And ultimately, that's going back to that statement you said about allowing people to achieve. So I love that.
Exactly.
Fab. No, that's really great. And I mean, you're really interested in bias. And so I guess how can organizations kind of ensure that recruitment practices are free from bias? Because that's an age-old challenge, I guess, of who you bring in, isn't it?
It's the tale as old as time, I think. And every recruiter will be sat there thinking, no, I've overcome bias. Fundamentally, it's everywhere. And I just want to put the cat among the pigeons. Everyone has bias. Everyone. But it's being aware of it. That's the key to this. However, recruitment bias, I would say, has a greater level of impact on business and its culture just because they are responsible for bringing people in. Organizations, essentially, from my point of view, need to diversify where they attract candidates to. That's essentially key. If you only ever recruit in the same place, you're only going to recruit from the same group of people. Gathering a pool or subject matter experts to write job descriptions. If you want to diversify your workforce and all of your job descriptions and, let's say, website content are written by one group, you will most likely just attract that one group. Aggressive is a phrase that's used all the time in job descriptions. You've got to be aggressive. You've got to do this. And actually, you'll alienate a huge proportion of your candidate pool based on a perception of your company culture that might not be accurate. And also, who needs to be aggressive at work? You need to be proactive. It's that subtle change of aggressive equals masculine and strong. Women will not generally apply for those job roles because they don't want to work for an aggressive culture.
No, that's some great points there, and some real thinking to be done, I guess, in those writing of job descriptions.
I'd be wrong. If anyone wants to have a read, Joan C. Williams' Bias Interrupted, one of the pivotal works on bias. So I most of my love from bias comes from this book. So I would be remiss of me for not
great,
just saying how
great plug.
Always.
Happy for it. I mean, it's just great to keep developing our knowledge and expanding our thought on things.
Agreed.
So keep that plug. That's great.
Agreed.
Fab. So I guess the other thing, thinking about this then, is that I guess we've heard it a bit, is that we're hearing that generations that are now coming into work kind of post-pandemic, I guess are slightly different to the people that were maybe coming before. So I guess, and that's probably heightened some of the voice and the volume with DE&I, especially with kind of other Black Lives Matters and things like that movements that have gone on. So I guess, what are your thoughts on this, and I guess also that kind of change in practice of that hybrid working model and things like that these days?
I would say it's probably one of the only good things to come out of COVID was the fact the corporate world finally realized we don't have to sit in an office to be productive. And for a lot of organizations, that was a huge shift, fundamental change in the fabric of their business. And actually, it's also changed the world of DEI. We're not required to be in an office 9 to 5 every day of the week. Instead, individuals can work in the comfort of an environment that they choose. And that's the key. They're not being told they have to work from home, and they're not being told they have to be in the office. Do both. If you want to work half from home, half from the office, it's not just about accessibility physically, if people can and can't get into an office. It's about mental health. Am I more productive if I work from the office or from home? But also, it's trusting. If a business is trusting its employees to carry out their work remotely and they are being supported, that empowerment is huge. I have worked in organizations where I have a manager literally shouting at me. I was an outdoor instructor, and I literally, over the radio, it would just be this, you're doing that, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, either just come and help or just leave me alone. And it's kind of, it's that trust, which I think a lot of people need. They need to be trusted. And if they're not being trustworthy, then actually they're not the right fit for your organization.
Absolutely. And that's where leaders then need to manage and deal with that accordingly. But totally, I think trust is probably one of the absolute fundamentals of leadership and being an employee, really, is if you want to be trusted, then you have to kind of make sure that you are working in the best way you possibly can, and diversifying your approach and being flexible to accommodate both business needs but also your needs to get the best out of everybody. So
whilst also looking at the recruitment piece, because this links in with it. If you want all people of all needs to apply, then it needs to be accessible. People need to know you're accessible. It's not about saying, oh, we're accessible as an organization. It's demonstrating that, it's showing that, it's living that, which
absolutely.
is the key.
No, that's great. So I guess one of the aspects of your roles we've not touched upon massively is that cultural side of things. So I guess I'm interested in your experience of what young people are currently bringing to organizations as kind of maybe new culture. What are the things you're seeing?
Yeah, I definitely see the generational gap now. Now, that's not aging myself, but there's definitely, I'm now not in the bracket of new starters in business, which is quite sad. But what is glaringly obvious is a level of acceptance and understanding of a greater level than most of the working population. So people that are coming in are more enlightened because there's more exposure to things like LGBT plus. DEI is discussed whether or not they realize it is through things like Black Lives Matter, the campaigning that goes on in social media, whether or not for good or for bad. Actually, they are a more understanding group of people. and really don't understand sometimes why the challenges we face in business are still there. Because it's like, well, it makes no sense. It's like, you are right. It does make no sense. But actually, they challenge that just by being. And actually, it is very refreshing to have those new perspectives.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, I see that in my own children, in the school that they're in, which is, very diverse and, kind of accommodates, very, very large group of people from all kind of special educational needs and backgrounds. And actually, it just makes for a far easier conversation and far easier experience for young people, which is great.
As it should be.
And I get. So I guess you mentioned right at the start that you're 3 weeks into role, thinking about some of these diversity, equality, inclusion, and cultural pieces we've talked about. What's something on your radar that or on your priority list that you're keen to get moving on?
So, as always, learner comes first.
Okay.
In my role, be it in the first 30 days, that's where I start. That's where I have to start my role as culture and equity lead. From there on, it's reviewing what we do with our learners, from the emails we send to the way we interact with them, seeing actually where we excel, but being desperately honest with ourselves and going, we need to develop in that area. Doesn't mean we are doing anything wrong. It's what we said earlier. It's that honesty to go, we could do it better, which every individual and business should have. One of the kind of pivotal points I'm looking at the moment is I'm actually building a training plan dedicated to culture and equity. And that's essentially to allow our teams to learn and have these types of discussions, which, let's be honest, 2 years ago probably would have been quite a challenging, taboo thing to do. Whereas it's definitely, I'm always a challenger. I will always challenge something that if I don't understand or disagree with it. But that wasn't the case for a lot of people. And actually, it's not, let's do 2 hours of DEI training once a year, tick the box, tokenism, goodbye. It's about having those ongoing, challenging discussions to evolve the working world from an educated and evident standpoint. That's the key. Yes, it comes from passion, it comes from emotion, it comes from lived experience, but evidence and education is the foundation, because our learners have to be at the forefront, but I need to make sure my business has the tools they need to have these discussions. Because if you look at British core values and all those kinds of elements of apprenticeships, there are some very deep and meaningful discussions, but it does start with one very important group of people, which I've not mentioned, and that is the SMT. Our senior management team will be starting their DEI allyship journey with me in a couple of months' time, because all of this work fails if you do not have the embodiment of this work from the top. Because
completely,
they always tell us to do stuff, but they've got to do it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that for me, within Outward Bound has been a hugely valuable thing, where we've put that diversity, inclusion, and equity piece right at the front of our values as an organization, because then it really prioritizes it. And ensures that SMT are asking themselves those questions, and then subsequently kind of it filters through the organization. But I think what you also said there was that honesty with yourselves as an organization. So it is being willing to have that honest conversation and saying, yes, we can do better. And I mean, that's great, Aimee. And I think, I can hear your passion with it. So I'd love to have this conversation with you in 2 years' time to see, so what have you done?
I tell you what, let's put it in the diary.
Absolutely, Aimee, absolutely. That's great. So I think it's probably, I think that's really captured some great aspects on diversity, equity, and inclusion and culture. Thank you, Aimee. I guess we've got one final question that we're asking all people that come to us for the Campfire chats. And that was, if you could recommend 3 things to a young person before or between leaving education and starting an early careers program to give them the best start, what would that be?
So I thought long and hard about this, to be honest, because there's lots of different things I would kind of encourage people to do, but fundamentally it's to look at the bigger picture. So that starts with maybe volunteering in different organizations, see that people have things to offer beyond just their job role. Doing online learning, so basically things that will benefit your career. Hundreds of free courses on business admin, DEI, communication skills, anything that can put you on the front foot. Because when you start in a new role, in a new business, even if you've been in the business world for 20 years, you are still on the back foot. So it's setting yourself to succeed. But ultimately, for everything that I talk about with in regards to learners, the key for me is holding yourself accountable.
Nice.
Be accountable for your learning, for your work. Like, we all make mistakes, but it's actually, when you get into that work environment, be prepared to be vulnerable. And actually, if you're doing these courses, you're speaking with people, you speak to your parents' friends and see if they've got kind of a bit like work experience. Just go and be helpful for a few weeks. Actually,
Yeah.
that shows more about you and your credibility to learn than sitting and just applying for jobs all the time. Because we all know you've got a CV, it doesn't take hugely long. So
Yeah.
accountability, ownership, and proactivity, I'd say.
Lovely. I mean, there's some 3 great things, and I really love that thought of, I guess how you framed it there is very much that investment in self. Understand who you are, take account for who you are. How do you want to be seen in the world of work? And then, ultimately, you're responsible for making that happen. It's nobody else's job. So,
no,
great wise words from Aimee Harman. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul.
That's brilliant. Well, that's brilliant. I think that kind of draws to a conclusion this campfire chat, Aimee. So thank you very much for your time. And thank you very much to the audience for joining us on this Outward Bound campfire chat.
Thank you very much, everyone.